Let's go live to Glasgow. Our political editor Andrew Clennell standing by in the early hours there in Scotland. Andrew, we'll get to the climate talks in a moment, but for the Prime Minister, I tell you what a rocky G20 it was, far from a Roman holiday for Prime Minister Morrison, thanks to the French President, Emmanuel Macron.
Well, I bet he regrets he went on the trip, Kieran, to be frank with you. I mean, he ummed and ahed about it, didn't he? So essentially, the Australian press pack was waiting in the Summit Centre for a press conference with Scott Morrison. There was a wait of about 40 minutes. And a group of 4 or 5 journalists realised that Emmanuel Macron was giving a press conference. Now, it was probably against protocols in the corridor to grab a TV camera out. So the decision was made to, and it was OK for the print journos, Kieran, because they had their dictaphones, but a decision was made to Pablo Vinales from SBS had the most up-to-date iPhone. So the decision was made to give him the job when Macron came out of filming the exchange. And that's where Macron really let loose once he was asked about the submarines. This was only about 20 minutes before Scott Morrison's press conference was scheduled, so he didn't really welcome the questions when he came out. Macron essentially calling Scott Morrison a liar, saying he wasn't told in good time that the French submarine contract, $90 billion with Australia, was going to be cancelled, that Scott Morrison was working behind the scenes on this AUKUS agreement with the UK and the US, said it breaches trust between the nations, says we've served wars together, and it does nothing for Scott Morrison's reputation. And critically, when asked if Scott Morrison lied to him or if he thought Scott Morrison lied to him, he said, "I don't think I know."
AUKUS deal was very bad news for France, but not just for France, because I think it's a very bad news for credibility and of Australia, and a very bad news for the trust that great partners can have vis-à-vis Australia. So I had a very direct discussion with Prime Minister Morrison about this issue. Now you have 18 months before a report. Good luck.
Do you think he lied to you?
I don't think. I know.
So Scott Morrison comes out. The obvious question is, did you lie? He obviously says no. He says, and I was there at the Elysee Palace in Paris in June when Scott Morrison and Emmanuel Macron came out before dinner, made a big joint statement, looked all chummy. Macron had his arms around him. Scott Morrison said he warned Macron then of the possibility that the submarine contract might be cancelled, in the sense that he said he didn't think the conventional submarines as opposed to the nuclear submarines were fit for purpose, and spoke about gateways in the contract. So from Morrison's point of view, he did give warning, but he never told him he was working on something else, the AUKUS agreement. Maybe it would have been cleaner if he just cancelled the contract, then went and stitched up AUKUS. Instead, I guess he was working on AUKUS, and then he tells Macron the decisions come, and that's what I guess is upsetting Macron.
President Macron told a couple of us around the corner that you didn't tell him the truth on the subs deal. In fact, he said that you might have lied. Is that true?
No.
He said that what happened was detrimental to your reputation. What do you say to that?
I'll always stand up for Australia's interests.
He says he doesn't think you lied to him, he knows you lied to him.
I don't agree with that.
Has he not told you that to your face? You saw him today, you saw him yesterday. He just said to a camera, "I don't think you lied to him." He knows you lied to him.
That's not true.
He was pretty clear that you need to do something to repair the relationship.
Well, we've done that process.
This is one of the biggest dust-ups between Prime Minister of Australia and a major leader for quite some time. I think Kieran tweeted earlier this morning about Mahathir from Malaysia and Paul Keating. Of course, Paul Keating called him a recalcitrant, but some, I guess it's 25 years ago now. But this, an even greater power in terms of France. And you might say, well, that probably doesn't matter that much. A lot of Australians will think we want the nuclear subs. We're more tied to the US and UK anyway. But the problem is, in the bilateral between Joe Biden and Emmanuel Macron, Joe Biden described the arrangement as clumsy. Joe Biden says that he was under the impression that the French were given due notice in terms of the cancellation of the contract. So that really put Scott Morrison in at that bilateral meeting on Saturday.
What happened was, to use an English phrase, what we did was clumsy. It was not done with a lot of grace. I was under the impression that France had been informed long before that the deal was not going through. I honest to God did not know you had not been.
And over the weekend, when I said to Scott Morrison, well, does that mean Joe Biden is saying that you're clumsy? He wasn't too happy with the question. But Prime Minister, he's calling you clumsy and without grace, isn't he? Isn't that the implication of what Joe Biden's saying?
No.
Andrew, before we get onto the climate issue, AUKUS is probably the most appropriately named acronym in political history, given how awkward this is for Scott Morrison to manage. It's just been a really messy start to the trip. And if we go to where you began our conversation this afternoon, the Prime Minister and his staff, I tell you what, privately, they must be thinking, why on earth did we jump on that plane?
Yeah, I think so. And there was always risk involved, not just in Rome, but now we've arrived, early in the morning in Glasgow. And I guess there will be questions about whether Scott Morrison will cop some flack for not having a stronger medium-term target. I think there's been some heat off him in relation to that because the G20, a lot of the big emitters haven't committed to 2050 for net zero. But nevertheless, I mean, anything that could go wrong did go wrong in terms of Emmanuel Macron. Macron clearly snubbing him in terms of a bilat, so he rang him, delaying his flight. You had that, and then you had Biden's comments. And then he was about to walk away from it, really, Scott Morrison. And then Emmanuel Macron weighs in. And there was no bilateral with Joe Biden either. That's probably the big concern, I think, Kieran, is, look, the relationship with France will be damaged for a while. And Australia will just have to work its way through that. I guess the concern is that the Americans aren't that happy with us at the moment either. So that's something the Australian government will have to keep a close eye on.
Yep. Well, in sort of everyday parlance, he's had a shocker so far. Trying to turn things around there now in Glasgow where you are. And as you say, he's got the net zero target at the least in terms of those conversations he'll be having over the coming days. And we know basically what his message will be. Technology, and look at the record. We're outperforming most other nations.
Yeah, well, all the leaders went to the Trevi Fountain to toss a coin in yesterday morning, Kieran. I'll tell you what, not many wishes came true. Well, unless you were Narendra Modi, I think, because Scott Morrison, obviously, then he had the Emmanuel Macron intervention. And Joe Biden and Boris Johnson were after a net zero global commitment by 2050, and they just didn't get it in the G20 communique. So even before you get to this COP26 conference, they're in trouble in the sense that China, Russia and India have pushed back against that and in the communique said net zero by at or near the middle of the century. We know the Chinese president isn't even here. We know Boris Johnson has been pessimistic about the outcome here. It's not looking like the COP26 result that Boris Johnson or Joe Biden want. And as I said, that might take some heat off Scott Morrison because it's clear the Allies wanted a more ambitious medium-term target. But I tell you what, if he goes for net zero by 2050, he's more ambitious than a lot of the other countries. So let's have a listen. I asked Scott Morrison about this G20 communique and what it meant in terms of global climate action, I guess. 2050 is what you've signed up to. The big emitters aren't signing up to that. How much of a concern is that? That really weakens the COP26 result, doesn't it?
Look, let me speak to Australia's performance, and you've heard me say it many times, and I'm going to tell you again. There are only 4 countries that sit around the G20 table that have a larger reduction in their emissions since 2005 than Australia. Germany, Italy, France, and the United Kingdom. There is only one other country, other than Australia, who has had a greater reduction in their emissions intensity, as expressed as a percentage of their GDP. That's the United Kingdom. Australia ranks second in the G20. So we're getting it done. The idea that we're going to take developing economy models and force them on developed economy models and force them on developing economies and say, this is the path you must travel, that is not going to work.